It is an unfortunate truth that the deep sea can be a dangerous and unpredictable place, home to a variety of creatures that are best approached with caution. Among the most fearsome inhabitants of the ocean are sharks, and the stories of their deadly encounters with humans have been the subject of both fascination and horror for decades. One particularly chilling incident involved two sharks who attacked and ripped a diver into pieces, leaving behind a gruesome scene that highlights the dangers of exploring the ocean's depths. In this video, we will delve into the details of this shocking event, examining what led to the attack and what we can learn from this tragedy. So subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon now for regular updates. The following story shows how strong people can be in the face of unimaginable tragedy. It also shows how unpredictable sharks can be and how far we still have to go before we can start to understand their complex and mysterious behavior. On October 14, 1972, three men named Brett Killian, Brew Killian, and Brew Killian got into a fight with a shark. Rod Temple and Robbie McKelvin were on a scientific expedition to get samples for a study being done at Cane Bay on the north shore of the island of St. Croix. Gilliam said that the area had some of the best wall diving spots in the Eastern Caribbean. He also said that getting to the drop-off wasn't hard and didn't require a long boat trip. The team's goal was to take pictures and check on traps they had set up for a project. The only problem was that their destination was a 210-foot wall next to a steep drop-off. The three divers weren't worried in the least though, because they were all experienced divers. When they got there, they went down the Cane Bay wall. Brett and Robbie got to work while Rod looked around. As he was looking around, Rod saw two white-tipped sharks in the distance. One was about 12 feet long, and the other was just a little bit bigger. The oceanic white-tipped shark is a very scary animal that lives mostly in tropical and warm temperate seas. It is famous for its long, rounded fins with white tips. According to recent studies, the species is endangered. This hunter will eat crabs, birds, stingrays, sea turtles, and threadfin, but will also eat pretty much anything, even people, even though it moves slowly. Oceanic white-tipped sharks are very dangerous to humans. They are known to attack survivors of shipwrecks and plane crashes at sea, and they may have killed several people who have never been found. This gives you an idea of how dangerous they are. After the USS Indianapolis was blown up in 1945, the white tip was the main species involved in what many people thought was one of the worst mass shark attacks ever recorded. It tore and mauled many of the ship's survivors. It is thought that up to 150 people died because of white-tipped sharks in that single incident until the required observations were made. The three men noticed they were ahead of schedule and felt static. This meant they would only need about 20 minutes to decompress, so they wouldn't have to hang around the sharks for too long. Brett later said, "I remember thinking it was strange to see oceanic white tips right here on the wall at Cane Bay. It was like walking off your back porch and seeing an African lion when you were expecting an alley cat." Robbie went up first and pointed out the sharks again as they swam by. The crew was no stranger to these sharks, as they had had their fair share of bad experiences with white tips when they worked offshore. The sharks would often bite their equipment, like steel cables from the research vessel or even the shafts and propellers. These two sharks, however, seemed to be different in some way, as they didn't seem to pay any attention to the others. Rod stayed behind because the dive plan said he should be the last one to come up. Brett met Robbie at about 175 feet, just over the ledge. They sat on a coral while waiting for Rod to join them, but as he got later, they started to worry. Ravi looked at the bread and pointed to his pressure gauge, which showed that he was running out of air. Suddenly, Robbie saw a cloud of bubbles coming from the deeper water, which meant that Rod was down below. The two men figured that Rob must have had some kind of air failure since Brett was using less air. Brett sent Robbie up while he went to see if Rod needed help, but when he got there, things were just as bad for Rod as they were for Robbie. Rod slashed at the shark's eyes and gills as he fought grimly to get away from his attackers. He did this to try to keep his friend's attackers away. Brett punched the hungry sharks in the torsos as they tore big chunks of Rob's flesh off his body. The two men kept attacking the sharks as they seemed to wiggle in pain, finally letting go of Rob and swimming back down to deeper water to get away from the danger. Brett looked up and saw Robbie, who was about 100 feet away and looking horrified. But in less than 15 seconds, the first shark came back and hit Rod again, dragging him and Brent over the drop-off. The attack probably only lasted a minute at this point, but Rod had lost a lot of blood and tissue and was almost completely limp. As the second shark came back, Brent was holding Rod's right harness strap. Brett felt Rod move again to fight off another attack, and his hopes rose when he realized that his friend was still alive. Brett clung briefly to the edge of the drop-off wall, stopping their wrap and descent. Suddenly, both sharks moved away again, and Brett watched them circle their position from about 10 feet away. He saw one shark swallow what was left of Rod's lower left leg right in front of his eyes, and the other got so full of flesh that it had to swim away. Brett grabbed Rod's waist harness as he felt his hands sinking into his friend's now mutilated torso. Unfortunately, there was no harness left to grab because Rod had been gutted, but he took off for the surface with Rod clutched to his chest as soon as the sharks were on them again. Rod screamed for the last time as the second shark grabbed him by the midsection and shook him. The blue water turned cloudy with bits of human tissue and blood. The bread was helpless as poor Rod was torn away from him. He watched in complete shock as Rob's lifeless body drifted into the abyss as the sharks fought over him. The attack began about 200 feet away, and Brett's death cage was 325 feet away, but he knew he was safe. Brett went much deeper than that, and in a futile attempt to get out, he almost used up all his oxygen. He then turned away from his friend's mangled body and said what must have been his last goodbye. As he got closer to the surface, his brain was starting to shut down because it didn't have enough oxygen. The effects of hypoxia were starting to show, but Brad would fall asleep before he could reach the surface. Brad miraculously woke up on the surface, gasping for air. It seemed that the small amount of air in a safety vest wore had been enough to flow to him the rest of the way up and save his life, but his survival was still a 1 in a million chance because he had to deal with an unknown amount of decompression. Brett started swimming to shore as fast as he could, but he felt his legs going numb. By the time he got to the beach, he could barely. Brett East was released from the hospital 2 days later. It was amazing that he had made it up almost 400 feet without a decompression sequence, but he would have permanent side effects from it. His arms and legs are still numb, and he has a lot of hearing loss and is legally blind in his right eye. These problems will last for the rest of his life. Robbie's last pictures of Rod and Brett were of them being dragged over the wall by the sharks in a cloud of blood. He didn't see Brett's ascent, so he thought they were both dead when he got to the shore. It wasn't until Brett called his dad from the hospital a week later that Robbie found out that Brett had survived. 2 of Rob's friends went to his memorial service at the beach. Rod's body was never found. Most people are too busy with their lives to stop and think about what's important. We go through the motions day after day, not realizing that we may only have a limited amount of time left. Many people die without ever really living, so it's best not to take life for granted. Just like Rod, you never know if tomorrow will be your last day on Earth. That's all for today. Make sure to like and subscribe to the video. Thanks for watching. See you next time.